Hello, and welcome back for the video for lesson 7.2. In 7.1, we learned about the square root property and completing the square so that we can use the square root property to solve quadratic equations. In this lesson, we're going to learn about the quadratic formula. And this formula works every single time. It is cumbersome and you have to be very detailed. And so that's why if there's other strategies that we can use, I would prefer those. But to use a quadratic theorem, we have to have our quadratic equation in this format: ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a cannot equal 0. And so these are the same solutions, except for one is the positive right here and one is the negative. So we have to take the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of this b squared minus 4ac. Make sure that's all under the square root. And then all of that is the numerator divided by 2a. So let's just jump in and solve a few of these. So we have x squared minus 4x plus 1. So a equals 1, b equals the negative 4, and c equals 1. And so x is going to equal the opposite of b, so the opposite of a negative 4, plus or minus the square root of a negative 4 squared. So this will always be a positive, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. So x equals a positive 4, the opposite of a negative, plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared is 16 minus 4, all over 2. This becomes plus 4 plus or minus the square root of 12, all over 2. And the square root of 12 can be simplified into 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 times the square root of 3 over 2. And I did that because the square root of 4 is 2, so that I could simplify that further. And now I can cancel out this 2, but only because I can cancel the 2 out of this part of the numerator and this 4 in the numerator. So 2 goes into that 2, but it also cancels into the 4, leaving a remaining 2. So my final answer is 2 plus or minus the square root of 3. So there's 2 answers to this equation. So let's solve the next one. X squared plus 4x plus 1 equals 0. So again, we have a equals 1. This time b equals a positive 4 and c equals 1. So x equals an opposite of a positive 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 1, all over 2 times 1. So this is a negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 4 is 12 again, over 2. And so this time it's just a negative 4 plus 2 times the square root of 3, all over 2. And the only difference here is the 2's still cancel, but I'm left with a negative 2. So the answer is a negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 3. So I still result in 2 answers. Let's look at C. So the first thing I would do here is I would multiply through by the LCD to get rid of my fractions. Well, for this purpose, let's just leave them as fractions. So A is 1/6, B is 1/2, and C is 1/3. So x is equal to the opposite of b, so the opposite of the negative 1/2, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a is 1/6 times c is 1/3, all over 2 times a is 1/6. So we have a negative 1/2 plus or minus the square root of, 1/2 squared is 1/4 minus 4/18 is minus 2/9 all over 1/3. 2 times 1/6 is 1/3. Okay, so we have to add fractions here, the square root. So I'm going to, in Desmos, take 1/4 and subtract 2/9 and turn it into a fraction. So it comes out to be 1/36. So this is x equals negative 1/2 plus or minus the square root of 1/36 over 1/3. So a negative 1/2 plus or minus 1/36 is just the square root of 1/36 is just 1/6 over 1/3. So we've got to handle both the plus and the minus. So we've got negative 1/2 plus 1/6 divided by 1/3. Or we have x equals a negative 1/2 minus 1/6 over 1/3. And so I am going to share my Desmos. I'm at the bottom here in Desmos. And so in parentheses, I've got a negative 1/2 minus 1/6 divided by 1/3. So there's one of them. It's a negative 2. And then I can just go up here and change that subtraction to an addition, and I get it's a negative 1. So those are my two answers. A negative 1, negative 2. So let's look at letter D. So on letter D, we have A equals 2, B equals 10, and C equals 0. There is no constant, so we still have to use 0 as C. So x is equal to the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C over 2A. So a negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 10 squared is 100 minus 0, because 4 times 2 times 0 is 0 over 4. So a negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 100 is 10 over 4. So now I have to do it with both the plus and the minus. So we have a negative 10, x is equal to a negative 10 plus 10 over 4. So that becomes 0 over 4 is 0. Or we have x equals a negative 10 minus 10 over 4 is a negative 20 over 4 or negative 5. So those are my two solutions. So if you need extra help, let me know and catch me back for the second video on E, F, and G, not required, but I will have those as extra videos.